to show you. Hellraiser, there are no limits. Rated R.
By 1987, we had been introduced to several different horror icons who could be described as slashers. We had seen 2 Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, there were a bunch of Friday the 13ths, Michael Myers had stalked his way through a couple Halloweens, Freddy Krueger had already ruined our sleep a few times over, and we were always ready to embrace new icons. The character featured on the poster for the new movie Hellraiser looked promising. He definitely had a unique look. His skin bleached, completely white, sliced into a grid pattern, pins sticking into the flesh all over his head and face. This guy, we'll call him Pinhead, was indeed destined to become a genre icon.
So I started reading Clive Barker's Books of Blood when they first came out, so I was already steeped in Clive Barker worship at the time. So when Hellraiser came out, I was ready.
But while his job involved people getting cut up with bladed weapons, he wasn't a slasher. And Hellraiser turned out to be something different than the horror films that we were used to in 1987. Something deeper, darker, more disturbing, and more disgusting.
If Clive went in now to pitch Hellraiser in all its sadomasochistic, transgressive, sexual hooking and chaining glory, I wonder whether he'd get a bite on it.
You know, I look at movies that shocked me in the 80s. One of them that I always go back to and talk about is Hellraiser.
Another movie that came out in the 80s that I really loved was Hellraiser.
Clive Barker first brought the concept of Hellraiser into the world with his novella, The Hellbound Heart, published in 1986, in the pages of an anthology called Night Visions. At that time, he had seen just 2 of his stories get turned into films, both directed by George Pavlou. In 1985, there had been Underworld, also known as Transmutations, and 86 brought Rawhead Rex. To say that Barker wasn't impressed with either movie would be an understatement. He considered them to be cinematic abominations. If there was going to be another film adaptation of his work, he intended to direct it himself. He had made a couple of short films in the 70s, and he figured he couldn't do it any worse than Pavlou had. So he turned to producer Christopher Figg and asked him what he could get made as a first-time feature director. Figg said to aim for a budget under $1 million. Barker told The Guardian that Figg had advised him to make something that would require just a house, some monsters, and pretty much unknown actors. And Barker happened to be working on a story that could be brought to the screen with those exact elements: The Hellbound Heart. It was also just the sort of story that he wanted to tell with his first film. He wanted to make something about good and evil in which sexuality was the connective tissue, and not the sort of sexuality usually seen in horror films, which is young people having sex and then getting killed. His film would have a sense of sexuality inspired by his time as a hustler and his experiences of going to S&M clubs. He had seen plenty of people get pierced for a sexual thrill. He had even seen blood being spilled in the name of pleasure. That's the type of sexuality that would be at the core of his movie.
Listen, I was a dude that was attracted to things, and I knew that some of the bodysuits that were being worn, it was something that I was like, this is fucking cool. Like the leather, the latex, it just felt taboo to me. It felt like a movie that I shouldn't have been watching. Even now, I mean, chains flying out of rotating mirror things with faces. It just, it felt wrong, and I think that made it attractive to me, that I didn't think I should be watching it.
Not only did he direct it really beautifully and with such great control, but what it was doing in terms of its imagery and what it was saying about our own desires really made me wonder how fucked up I was, personally. And we're still finding that out, just so you know.
Barker was able to secure a budget of $900,000 from New World Pictures, a company run by the legendary Roger Corman, and he reworked The Hellbound Heart into a script. If you're familiar with Hellraiser and decide to read The Hellbound Heart, you'll find that Barker made one of the most scene-for-scene faithful adaptations ever. The novella is basically the movie on the page. It makes sense that the movie was extremely faithful, not just because Barker made it, but also because the book is quite short. Just over 150 pages. So Barker didn't have to simplify or trim out moments. He actually added some. He just had to change the writing into the screenplay format. He did make some other changes along the way, most notably the relationship between 2 characters, but nothing major. You probably already know how the story goes. It begins with a man named Frank Cotton. He's staying in his childhood home when he solves a puzzle box that unleashes supernatural beings known as Cenobites. That's how Pinhead enters the picture, although in the film he's simply credited as lead Cenobite. He's accompanied by the Chattering Cenobite, the Butterball Cenobite, and the female Cenobite, or as fans know them, Chatterer, Butterball, and Deep Throat. These beings are said to be explorers in the further regions of experience, demons to some, angels to others. They proceed to tear Frank apart, giving him pain and pleasure indistinguishable. Soon after, Frank's brother, who was Rory in the book but is named Larry in the film, moves into the house with his wife Julia. See, Julia had had an affair with Frank right around the time of her wedding to Larry. They even had sex on top of her wedding dress. While moving in, Larry accidentally cuts his hand and drips blood on the floor of the room that Frank was destroyed in. This allows Frank to escape from the dimension of the Cenobites and starts regenerating his body. It's an impressive special effects sequence, similar to Freddy Krueger's regeneration in the next year's A Nightmare on Elm Street 4: The Dream Master. Frank doesn't completely regenerate though. He needs to feed on others to fully get back to himself. At this point, he doesn't even have skin. Here you have one seriously unnerving concept: a skinless escapee from hell lurking in the attic of a home while a married couple goes about their lives in the rooms below. He soon reaches out to Julia for help. She's a cold and distant woman, but her passion for Frank burns hot. Their brief affair was very intense, and she's so into this guy that she's willing to kill for him. She goes out on the town and picks up men, returning them to her attic, where the men are murdered so that Frank can get his skin back. It's quite a twisted love story, but there's trouble in this bloody paradise because the Cenobites don't like it when people escape from them. A character named Kirsty is a mousy friend with a crush on Rory in the book. In the film, she's Larry's daughter and Frank's niece. She's the one who's able to find out what's really going on with Frank and Julia, and after solving the puzzle box, she alerts the Cenobites.
And people familiar with the books of blood, and obviously at that point I had a 15-year relationship with Clive's writing. The people who know the books of blood, knew the books of blood before Hellraiser, will know that Clive's style is naturally not flat prose. His style is naturally very poetic.
Barker was able to assemble such a strong cast for his film. Sean Chapman makes Frank Cotton someone who practically oozes slime and makes you feel dirty just looking at him. When Frank doesn't have skin, the role is taken over by Oliver Smith. Andrew Robinson has a creepy screen presence and has played a lot of villains during his career, most famously in the first Dirty Harry movie. But here he was cast as Larry, the clueless potential victim of his wife and brother. Ashley Lawrence plays Kirsty, who is smart enough to want to keep her distance from her stepmother. At first, Kirsty is just a loving daughter, starting to make her way through life as an independent adult. It's when she has an encounter with her skinless uncle that she steps up and becomes a true heroine. She fights off Frank and takes away his puzzle box, realizing it means something to him. Faced with the Cenobites after solving the puzzle herself, she's able to keep her wits about her and make a deal with these supernatural beings. She understands they're actually the lesser of three evils.
Because I've always argued that you can take the Cenobites out of that story entirely. Just forget the Cenobites exist and think about the story of Hellraiser. It works. Frank and Julia are the monsters in the film. The Cenobites are impartial judges, umpires.
Frank and Julia are more evil and more dangerous than the Cenobites are. At least the Cenobites have some degree of honor. To save herself and her father, Kirsty enters a house she knows is inhabited by murderers. And her solution is to bring sadomasochists from beyond the grave with her. Now that's a final girl worth looking up to. Producers suggested that Barker fill the Cenobites' roles with stuntmen, but he insisted on hiring established actors. So Nicholas Vince became Chatterer, Simon Bamford plays Butterball, and Grace Kirby is Deep Throat. Vince and Bamford would reprise their roles in the future, but Kirby refused to endure the Cenobite makeup process for more than just the one film.
The Cenobites are entirely out of time, I've always argued. Again, there's a deal of big hair and shoulder pads going on with Julia that tells us we're in the late 1980s, approaching the 90s. But the Cenobites just don't age and won't age. And I've said often that you could show an image of the Cenobites to a 14th century monk, and he'd know exactly what he was looking at. And that again, I think is part of the brilliance of what Clive does there. Is he just throws that story wide open by putting these creatures, things, beings, whatever they are, demons, angels, into the middle of that story.
Of course, the standout of the group is Pinhead. To fill this role, Barker turned to an actor he had known since high school, Doug Bradley. He actually gave Bradley the choice between playing Pinhead or being one of the delivery guys who helped Larry and Julia move into the house. Bradley briefly considered being a delivery guy because it would have allowed him to show his own face on screen, but he figured the Pinhead character would leave more of an impression on viewers. And boy did he. He ended up having more of an impact than the filmmakers could have possibly anticipated. If an icon was going to emerge from this movie, they thought it would be Julia. Claire Higgins has never watched Hellraiser in its entirety because she can't handle watching horror, but she did great work bringing her murder accomplice, Ice Queen character to life. Still, everyone should have known that Julia was going to be overshadowed by Pinhead. He has such a striking look that it nearly guaranteed his place as an icon from the moment that he appears on screen. The captivating, almost regal performance that Bradley delivered made it a sure thing. Barker had been encouraged to make the character more like his horror contemporaries, give him jokes like Freddy, or make him silent like Jason, but he was aiming for something more like Christopher Lee's Dracula. Barker told The Deadbeat, "Part of the chill of Dracula surely lies in the fact that he is very clearly and articulately aware of what he is doing. You feel that this is a penetrating intelligence. I don't find dumb things terribly scary. I find intelligence scary, particularly twisted intelligence." Barker likes to think of the character as the Hell Priest, a more dignified name than Pinhead, but Pinhead is what he's known by. Interviewed for the book Sacred Monsters, Bradley revealed how he had added depth to the character by keeping in mind that he was mourning his lost humanity. There wasn't a backstory in place yet, but Bradley and Barker agreed that Pinhead had once been human, so Bradley gave him a perpetual unconscious, grieving for the man he had once been, for a life and face he couldn't even remember, a frozen grief. I felt Pinhead existed in an emotional limbo where neither pain nor pleasure could touch him. A pretty good definition of hell for me.
A character that maybe had 3 minutes of screen time, 3 minutes maybe of being in the film, terrified me. And anyone else could have played that character and I might not have had the same feeling, have had the same reaction. But you look at someone like Doug Bradley playing Pinhead in that film, it's something that, it hit me different. So I would then seek out Doug Bradley movies, whether it's another Hellraiser or some other role that he's playing. These are all things that I started to notice in the 80s that I was picking out things that would then follow me for the rest of my life. Again, my affection for certain actors or performances.
From the first time I had the makeup on and I just sat in the makeup room and stared at this new me in the mirror, a lot of impressions, of power and authority and just the strangeness of this, what appeared to be a piece of self-mutilation was a sense of melancholy about him, and I didn't really know where that came from, or what there was nothing to indicate what that might be, but there was a kind of sense of heavy sadness to me about him. I attached that to him to his lost humanity that he was aware of but couldn't remember.
I first saw Hellraiser during the horror VHS renting spree that I call my childhood. I had become a dedicated horror fan around 1987, so this would have been one of the earlier viewings for me, and it troubled me more deeply than many of the other horror movies I had seen. This was something different, more intense, more extreme. The film stacks multiple, creepy, unnerving concepts on top of each other. Nearly everything about it troubled me in some way. The gore, the infidelity, the sleaziness of Frank. The film is enveloped in a thick atmosphere of dread, and it features some seriously screwed up characters. It feels dirty and off-puttingly weird. It was uncomfortable to watch, but that's actually a good thing when a horror movie can make you as uneasy as Hellraiser made me, and still makes me, to a lesser degree, when I watch it now. As a kid, I was even put off by the oddly out-of-place feeling of the setting, and that wasn't even intentional. Hellraiser was shot in England, and Barker meant for it to be set in England, but New World Pictures said that the film should be set in America, believing that it would have a better chance of having success in the US if it were set there. But just casting a couple Americans in the lead doesn't make the movie feel like it's happening in the US, especially when Kirsty is shown walking beside the Thames. I could always tell this wasn't America, and most of the supporting cast is obviously from the UK. While Higgins and Bradley got to keep their own voices, other characters played by British actors were dubbed, just adding to the overall strangeness. The film doesn't dig very deeply into the mythology of the puzzle box or the Cenobites at all, but what's there is enough to impress as a brilliant original concept. Barker was taking an intelligent approach to his horror story, but he still kept things moving at a good pace, and wasn't afraid of splashing blood, filth, and perversion across the screen.
It was not quite like any other franchise horror movie I'd seen. I loved its brazen sexuality and its gore, and it would just seem like the filmmakers were putting everything they had into it because they didn't have the budget. They had to work with the limitations and make it work for them, and that's kind of my favorite kind of horror movies. I think it's something that which is what was really the original independent genre or horror movies, of course, if you go back, to the 60s and 50s. There were some of the best films that came out of it were those.
Barker had some trouble with the censors, and sometimes there were disagreements with New World Pictures over things like their decision to set the film in the US and dub some of the actors, or them making Barker replace music by the band Coil with music composed by Christopher Young. However, that turned out well because Young's score is awesome.
And it has an incredible score by Christopher Young. I mean, if you ever want to hear a great classic score for what feels like the most elevated Hammer horror film of all time, it's Christopher Young's score.
The executives had faith in the project. They even extended the shooting schedule so Barker would have extra time to make the film. Any struggles were worth it in the end. Hellraiser was a financial success, making many times its small budget at the box office. As you probably could have guessed, given the number of other Hellraiser stories that are out there have been many sequels, a reboot, and even comic books. Barker even wrote another novel that features the Pinhead, or Hell Priest, character. There had been many opportunities to further explore the mythology introduced in this story. And all these years later, Pinhead is still celebrated as a genre icon. Someone who stands out amongst these slashers, monsters, and madmen. Doug Bradley has passed the role over to other actors who can put their own twist on it, but he will always be considered one of horror's greats for what he did as the character. Hellraiser is also one of horror's greats, and even though it can be unpleasant to witness, it's worth watching again and again. So you can marvel at what Barker and his collaborators were able to accomplish. This film tells a fascinating story, brought to the screen perfectly on a small budget. And Barker made horror history with his first attempt at directing a feature. What do you think of Hellraiser? Do you remember the first time you saw it? And were you as disturbed by it as I was? Leave a comment and share your memories of this 80s classic.
I've had the fortune of sitting down with Clive and going up and meeting him in the house, and he took me on the tour of the other house with all the art, and just talking to him about what his own sort of predilections were and his worldview. Hellraiser is the perfect distillation of that. All the other subsequent things that he's worked on, I think, have been sort of undermined or futzed with or influenced in ways, but if you want to really see what's behind Clive Barker's eyelids, go watch Hellraiser.
Or taking it kind of personal, aren't you?
RoboCop, the future of law enforcement. Rated R. Starts Friday, July 17th at a theater near you.
When I think about how many references and nods to the decade there are in modern pop culture, growing up as a kid in the 80s was pretty cool. We were spoiled for choice when it came to sneaking out to our local cinema, of which there were 2 near where we lived. Not huge multiplexes like the ones that somehow survived a pandemic and the streamers, but 2 independent venues that were either a decent walk away or a short drive if mom or dad were taking us. One of the venues still exists today, but its programming generally focuses on either plays at Christmas time or cover bands or artists every week. It's a great venue that saw my brother and I sneak in to see cool 1987 films such as Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Batteries Not Included, The Secret of My Success, or even Fatal Attraction. Alright, I confess, we never managed to skip the ushers to see that one. But the schoolyard was abuzz with rumors of a bunny being boiled and Jack from Romancing the Stone having some rather more serious lady trouble this time. One dodgy VHS later acquired that same year confirmed both rumors to be true. Unfortunately, we never managed to sneak past the dozy ushers to see RoboCop in 1987, so my first exposure to the movie was via one of the local terrestrial TV stations who heavily censored the film, cut it to shreds in fact. I adored the movie instantly, despite some of the best scenes being trimmed even though it was being shown post-Watershed.
Your client's a scumbag, you're a scumbag, and scumbags see the judge on Monday morning.
Listen, pal. Your client's a crumbag. You're a crumbag, and crumbags see the judge on Monday morning.
When RoboCop foils the store robbery, the thug's F-word expletives were dubbed to
Why me?
while we never got to see Murphy's brutal execution in full, and even Emil's melty death by toxic waste was massively trimmed. However, all was not lost. My older brother, Captain John Sparrow, managed to get his grubby hands on an uncut copy of the film on VHS. And finally, we were able to experience the movie just as director Verhoeven had intended, uncut in all its gory glory. Murphy's execution was brutal. The locker room scene had naked breasts, and Emil's head was gleefully splattered across the speeding vehicle's windshield. Murphy's transformation from being an ordinary police officer and family man into a seemingly emotionless cyborg was shown in full, and it elevated the movie for me exponentially. It's in these scenes that RoboCop blurs the line between sci-fi and horror.
I fucking love that guy!
With his cybernetic body that shimmers in Detroit's nighttime neon-lit cityscape, plus a futuristic visor, well, it was for the time, scanning the streets for any sign of crime, RoboCop is pure sci-fi. However, if you look past this and take a deep dive into the shiny metallic narrative of this movie, you may just be surprised to see a nasty horror poking out from under the helmet of the law enforcer. The gruesome and very memorable transformation of Officer Alex Murphy into the mechanized RoboCop is a brutal scene, doesn't hold back on the horror we see unfurling for its protagonist. Murphy has been separated from his partner, trapped by Clarence Boddicker and crew, mercilessly torn apart and left for dead. When OCP chooses him for its RoboCop program, we see how ruthless the apparent good guys are with what they choose to keep off the unfortunate police officer.
Well, he signed the release forms when he joined the force. He's legally dead. We can do pretty much what we want to. Lose the arm.
It's a grim representation of the human body, being brutally invaded, maimed, and eventually reassembled, elements that are hallmarks of body horror as we know it.
RoboCop is another one of those examples of machinery, sentience, Are they going to happen? Of course, the RoboCop was part human. I think he started as a human. They roboed him up later. So is it worth it? This is the question I asked myself watching it. Is it worth it to mechanize parts of me that might be dead and carry on? Or should I just die when it's time for me to naturally die? You know? And especially when it comes to law enforcement or any kind of enforcement of rules and regulations, and if there's a machine that's checking us on that, will it have any understanding and any humanity to offer us? Because everything isn't just black and white answers. You know, there's a gray area on so many things that like a person would be able to listen to our story and go, well, you know what, like a traffic cop, I'll let you off on this time, but here's a warning, don't do it again. Right, a robo may not understand that. It's like, here are the rules. You are not in compliance. Bum bum bum. You know, that's like when you're on a customer service phone line and you're like, no, there's not an option for the what I need. Are you wanting to close your account? Press 1. If you're wanting to pay your account, press 2. It's like none of the options apply to the question that I have for this last bill I got, and so you can't. So if you have a cop in front of you that has that same mentality of, well, here's the options I have, that's it, no humanity, that scares me to death again, yes.
Looking back on RoboCop, you can see the clear links to both body and psychological horror running throughout the narrative. Set in a violent, near-apocalyptic Detroit, evil corporation Omni Consumer Products wins a contract from the city government to privatize the police force. To try out their crime-eradicating cyborgs, they need a fallen officer to be their test subject. So when new street cop Alex Murphy, played by the excellent Peter Weller, is murdered by crime lord Boddicker, played with gleeful menace by Kurtwood Smith, OCP uses his body to support their untested RoboCop prototype. However, when RoboCop learns of the company's nefarious plans, he turns on his masters. The concept of human identity is not only brutally challenged, but also distorted, much like Murphy's body, throughout the narrative. We don't just see Murphy being executed, we also see the very essence of the man all but stripped away, then manipulated and transformed into something largely artificial. This resonates with the themes of psychological horror. With it not only Murphy's body that we see being torn apart and reassembled, but his own mind, identity, and sanity are also twisted almost beyond repair. I must admit that a lot of these themes went over the head of this particular young movie fan when I first saw the uncut version of the film. That doesn't mean I didn't appreciate how brutal the violence was, or how heartbreaking Murphy's journey is for not only him, but also his family. Despite them only having limited screen time, of course, I was enthralled by how director Paul Verhoeven was able to create a movie that effortlessly blended futuristic sci-fi action and violence with an engaging story. The script also managed to introduce supporting and side characters with their own unique personalities and motives. Even poor Bobby, with a short appearance and unwitting ability to fly, is one of the most memorable characters.
Can you fly, Bobby?
Clarence, no!
Just because Boddicker uses him as a human police deterrent. My brother and I would recreate several scenes from the movie when we were mucking around. But with him being built like a brick shithouse, I was never Bobby. It was only when I watched the uncut version of the movie with more mature eyes that the biting satire and social commentary brought more meaning to the film for me. Movies were often heavily censored for TV broadcast in the 80s, and even though I disagreed with it one iota, it wasn't just RoboCop that fell victim to the trend. John McClane's Yippee-ki-yay motherfucker was changed to
Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon.
The point is that movies such as RoboCop have to be experienced just as their director intended.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.
In all of their uncut glory. The hardcore violence is an element of the movie that lends itself perfectly to the themes in the film, especially in the fine line it treads between humanity and artificiality. Murphy's mechanical existence finds the officer stuck somewhere between being entirely alive or entirely dead, which has been a constant theme of existential horror in classic literature. There's a neat parallel between RoboCop and the novel Frankenstein from 1818, written by English author Mary Shelley. The story revolves around a gifted scientist called Victor Frankenstein, who succeeds in giving life to a being of his own creation. However, the resulting entity is not exactly the perfect specimen that he had hoped for, and Victor and mankind ultimately rejected the hideous creature in general. Just like the creature in Shelley's novel, RoboCop is a creation who struggles to find his own way in an increasingly volatile and unforgiving world. Of course, the creature in Frankenstein is of limited intelligence, while RoboCop is much the opposite. His strength and abilities are heightened by the cybernetic suit that he finds himself now entwined with. However, both Frankenstein and RoboCop start out with incomplete memories of their past and slowly regain fragments over time. Murphy's in the form of his family and murder.
You really don't remember me, do you?
Excuse me. I have to go. Somewhere there is a crime happening.
RoboCop is a really sly satire and commentary on American consumerism and policing for profit. You certainly think our world with prisons for profit and all these other things is directly predicted by that film, and the sheer craziness of it and how it incorporates all the advertisements and the I'll buy that for $1, and it captures the world we live in now with a relentless savagery and humor. RoboCop is and it has that great score done by the same composer who did Conan the Barbarian, and it's and the suit is amazing. Again, Rob Bottin created suit, and Peter Weller's performance, and it's another tragic monster movie, right? Another tragic Frankenstein story. Is I Am created deliberately by somebody who wants to just forget my humanity exists, and that's a problem when I come back to roost. So. Yeah, it's a great story. Murphy's murder is one of the most horrendous, violent scenes I've ever seen.
Our household back in the 80s was probably much the same as most folk at the time. We had a standard 4x3 TV with 4 channels and a remote that was connected to it via a long, cumbersome wire. The most high-tech gaming technology that we had was a rubber-keyed ZX Spectrum 48K that would later be upgraded to a Commodore Amiga, plus a family dog and a one-eyed hamster. Don't ask, it's a long story. One constant, however, was our unified love of horror, especially between my brother and myself. As I mentioned, our parents would let us watch some fairly explicit TV shows and movies, which was in contrast to our friends. One of my pals had a birthday party in which we all gathered around to watch Top Gun on VHS, only for his mom to fast forward during the tame, soft-focused sex scene between Cruise and McGillis. One thing that always fascinated me, not only in horror movies but also in any movie genre, were the villains. I was also obsessed with Star Wars as a kid and always found the bad guys far more compelling than Luke and their friends. Sure, Han Solo was cool as fuck.
Chewie, take the professor in the back and plug him into the hyperdrive.
But I always rooted for Vader and the Empire in the original trilogy. This is another major highlight of RoboCop, and something that also leans the movie in the direction of the horror genre, the Rogues Gallery. Clarence Boddicker doesn't exactly look fearsome or intimidating, but his sheer brutality and fearless persona is chilling. This is exemplified throughout the movie, especially when he's arrested by Robo, and upon being taken to the police station, he calmly looks at Sergeant Reed, spits blood, and says,
"Just give me my fucking phone call."
Of course, Boddicker's merciless taunting and execution of Murphy towards the beginning of the movie shows his truly gruesome nature, but it's in the movie's other, more subtle nuances that show the character for what he really is. The sheer monstrosity of Boddicker and his crew help to generate a palpable sense of dread in the film, a classic trope of the horror genre. RoboCop was a massive part of my movie watching life growing up, and it's a hugely influential piece of filmmaking for me as somebody working in the industry. Although I never appreciated the sequels, especially Part 3, which really needs to be blown up by one of Joe's rocket launchers.
Be loyal as a puppy.
However, its legacy lived on, and I would play the video games on our ZX Spectrum and later on the Amiga. Apparently, some of RoboCop's VFX was created on the Commodore Amiga, so I guess it wasn't just good for the Robo games and Chucky Egg 2. While the movie boasts many sequences that elevate it beyond simply being a sci-fi classic, it's also the looming specter of technology that lends RoboCop to the horror genre. It's not necessarily the technology itself, it's the misuse and dehumanizing possibilities it presents that bring the horror. RoboCop's programming is so relentless that it constantly battles against his fading human memories, which also presents another parallel with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. They're both tortured by their creator's ambition, a pertinent metaphor for the uncontrolled advancement of technology, and the effect this could potentially have on society and the world as a whole. Ultimately, whether or not you agree that RoboCop is part sci-fi, part horror, but all cop, is entirely up to your own interpretation of the movie. However, I hope this video has given you something to ponder the next time you take a trip to the dystopian city of Detroit, as Robo battles his own sense of existence, while unfortunate office execs get obliterated, and expendable henchmen are thrown from speeding vans. Let us know your thoughts on RoboCop as a horror movie in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.
Nice shooting, son. What's your name?
Murphy. No man is deadlier.
If it bleeds, we can kill it.
But this time, what he's up against is no man. Predator, rated R. The hunt begins Friday, June 12th everywhere.
I'm sure many of you wonderful gorehounds will have seen the Jack Black comedy Be Kind, Rewind from 2008. And if so, I'm sure its premise will resonate with you. One of the main gripes of renting movies back in the 80s was the frustrating way in which people would forget, or not bother, to rewind the VHS copies of movies that they'd rented, whether they were from Freddy or more conventional businesses like Blockbuster. You'd excitedly open the box to see that the tape was mostly on the spool on the right side of the tape. Even worse, your daft older brother, like mine, may have put the tape in and pressed play without first checking it, only to spoil a major part of the movie like a jackass. Thanks, bro. However, this time around, Predator remained unspoiled, but also unrewound, which meant waiting a while for that shitty, rickety VHS player to rewind the tape, making a desperate whirring sound as it did so. My brother is a few years older than I am, and he would also invite his older pals to watch movies with us, which, to be fair, was pretty awesome, especially if some of those friends were girls.
Predator is, I had a great fortune to work with a film editor named John F. Link. John was the editor of that film, co-editor of Predator. He went on to cut Die Hard afterwards, was nominated for cutting Die Hard. When I worked with John was on an HBO series called The Hitchhiker, which was, basically anthology Yuppies Run Amok. But the interesting thing about the time I worked with John is it was during his break when they were on hiatus and redoing The Creature from Predator. So they had shot all the stuff with The Creature that didn't work, with the Van Damme creature, the praying mantis, And then they shut down while Stan Winston was redoing The Creature. And that's when I worked with John during that period. So I heard all about the version of Predator that didn't work. I would sit in his cutting room and he would tell me all these stories about it. And heard a lot about, Arnold hated it and this and that, and nobody liked it, and it just wasn't going to come together. And they had this new version that they were going to go back and shoot for 6 weeks when he finished. So we finished working on The Hitchhiker in January, and that was like my first job in the film industry. I was like as an apprentice film editor, and he went to cut that, and I saw John that summer, and after Predator was finished, and it just literally saw it in the theater, then went and had lunch with him in down in California. And he talked about just what a difference it was to get this creature that works so effectively now, and the fact that it was this great sort of mask and how those battles all went, but all that was reshot. All that was something they did later. They had the whole film, and then they had to go back and retroactively put that in to make that movie work. And I think that's one of the things, it's a great story of this sort of rescue mission that goes awry, and this monster from another world and coming down to hunt. It's the most dangerous game with an alien. The plot is ludicrously simple, which is why it works so well. You could have written it on the back of a napkin. But that's why it's so effective. It's just simple, and it's just David and Goliath. Only David in this case is played by Arnold. But it's a landmark creature that still people are making Predator movies to this day.
Back in the 80s, it was our mission as adolescents to obtain and binge watch as much senseless, over-the-top sex and violence as possible. And to a large degree, we succeeded. There were also rumors of raunchy porno mags being stashed away under the local leisure center's entrance ramp, which were true.
I finally get to see what a vagina looks. Oh God! Oh my God! Oh my God!
And my friends would brag about iconic scenes from movies that they had watched recently via a dodgy VHS copy. The eye gouging from The Terminator, or when Bruce Campbell chopped his own hand off in Evil Dead 2, would gain mythical status between my pals and I. Some of us hadn't even seen those movies, but we would wax lyrical about the scenes as if they were still fresh in our memories. After seeing Predator for the first time, another set of scenes and quotes soon began to take on a mythical status. We hadn't been spoiled by modern marketing campaigns that seem to give away most of the best money shots from movies nowadays. So when Apollo Creed had his arm blown off and Arnie taunted the Predator with his
ugly motherfucker
line, we were delirious with excitement. Unsurprisingly, like many other movies from the decade, it fell foul of the dreaded censors around the globe when either shown on TV or on its physical home entertainment formats. On American TV broadcasts, all shots of the Predator's naked face were inexplicably removed, as were all instances of the Predator mimicking human speech. Also, quite hilariously, a lot of the best moments of the movie were cut for TV broadcast. Amusingly, in the Italian language version, one solitary word slipped through the dubbing process. Around the 1 hour and 16-minute mark, Dutch is being chased by the Predator and says shit as he slips and begins sliding towards a cliff.
Oh, shit!
As I've mentioned many times over the course of this wonderfully nostalgic series, the route to obtaining movies such as Predator came from either Freddy, the amenable local video store guy, or my older sibling. In the case of Predator, my first viewing of the movie was at a friend's house while their parents were on a night out. We would often get together on weekends to either race our RC cars around the local park, hang out in the mall chasing girls, or in this case, bond over age-inappropriate movies. My brother's pal Jason had acquired a copy of the film, and up until that point, the only information we had about it was that it starred the king of violent movies, Arnie, and it was R-rated. Oh, and apparently there was a scene in which somebody's ripped open chest cavity was on full display, which there was, and it was awesome. This clandestine viewing of Predator was one of the most defining moments as a young lad where you feel like you're doing something that you shouldn't be, but the rewards far outweighed the potential fallout. In fact, during our second viewing of the movie, Jason's folks returned from wherever they had been that night, probably drunk, and didn't give a shit that we'd taken over the front room and were waxing lyrical about the Predator being
one ugly motherfucker.
My friends and I would talk about that night for years, about the over-the-top muscles and machismo on display, the amazing retro visual effects, and especially as the movie really kicks into gear in the third act, as Arnie's squad starts to get picked off one by one. It's one of those movies that, if it comes on TV, I can't help but get invested in it all over again. And yes, even if it's the version that's cut to shreds. What's so great about Predator, aside from the obvious, awesome alien action, blood, guts, blown off arms, Arnie's one-liners?
What's the matter? The CIA got you pushing too many pencils? Huh?
Is that it's also a very efficiently directed action thriller. Director John McTiernan displayed a wonderful knack for visuals and mayhem in the movie, and would further enhance his reputation in action cinema with the irrepressible Die Hard the following year. It's a superb clash of genres with a pretty simple premise that throws a grenade-sized bunch of ideas at the screen. It's a horror monster movie, an 80s action behemoth, it has sci-fi leanings, and it also makes the most of its muscle-bound cast, with one-liners and dumbass machismo thrown in for good measure. It was a shame my friends and I didn't get a chance to witness the mayhem on the big screen when we were kids, but that first load of R-rated movies we saw helped to shape my love for film, and was also the first major expansion of my cinema universe. Also helped in a huge way by a certain space opera that Disney inexplicably seemed to have ruined since acquiring Lucasfilm.
Rey Skywalker.
I'm a firm believer that cinema is a way of life, and you can never replicate the thrill of experiencing an amazing movie for the first time with like-minded fans on the big screen. Although we never got to sneak into a screening of Predator, our adolescence was still full of memorable movies caught on the big screen. I'll bite through the back door sometimes.
Predator became one of my father Stan's most well-known creatures, but it almost never happened. Boss Films created the first Predator suit. It was a very unique bug-like design, but it was on stilts and was very impractical for the jungle setting, and they had to shut down the movie. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had worked with Stan on the Terminator, suggested that John McTiernan get in touch with Stan and hopefully save the movie and create a new Predator. Well, Stan and his team had only about 6 weeks to do it, but they devised what would become one of the great creature suits, monster suits in Hollywood history, Predator. That film works really, really well. They put together the most macho men in the movies at the time, Arnold and Carl Weathers and Jesse the Body Ventura and other just muscle men of the day, and they all are trying to outdo each other in the macho department. And then along comes 7'4" Kevin Peter Hall in a Stan Winston Predator suit, and he outmuscles them all. And that's really what makes the movie great.
With the success of Predator, not only in cinemas, where it eventually grossed $98.3 million worldwide off a reported budget of $15 to $18 million, but also via home entertainment. The talk of a follow-up was inevitable. So, after Arnie went toe-to-toe with the 7-foot monster, did a massively lucrative and critically lauded franchise emerge? Well, not exactly. But that's not to say that the subsequent movies and crossovers were altogether a disappointment. In 1990, 20th Century Fox released Predator 2, directed by Stephen Hopkins and starring Danny Glover, Gary Busey, Bill Paxton, and Kevin Peter Hall once again as the titular Predator. Arnie's absence was a huge loss. But the movie is a lot of fun, with the Los Angeles set action a neat idea and its modern cult following much deserved.
You are one ugly mother.
Fox also released 2 more sequels with the Nimrod Antel directed Predators in 2010 and Shane Black's The Predator in 2018, both of which have their moments but fail to enhance the franchise any more than being simply average action movies. It wasn't until 2022's Prey, a prequel directed by Dan Trachtenberg, that the franchise was stripped back to the basics for a lean, mean, and effective stalk and prey thriller. It had some great kills and a superb lead role for the awesomely named Amber Midthunder.
You could get shot sneaking up like that.
Who's sneaking?
Aside from the several sequels and that one prequel, we also got the divisive Aliens vs. Predator films, plus some fun video games that allowed you to play as either a predator, an alien, or even a colonial marine. I spent many an hour playing the superb Aliens vs. Predator 2, mainly as the Predator, so I could splat alien acid blood all over the place. Man, I love that game. I know we've mentioned the visual effects briefly in this retrospective, but there's something wonderfully nostalgic about not only the 80s aesthetic of the VFX, but also how the real-life locations add a sense of immersion to the movie. CGI was very much in its infancy when Predator was released, which thankfully meant that a lot of the VFX were done practically. The Predator's costume looks amazing, and the gory gags littered throughout all have that great practical look to them. However, for the scenes in which the Predator is camouflaged, it must have been one hell of a painstaking job for the VFX artists to chroma key him out of the scenes. Also, while the film wasn't entirely shot on location, the production did shoot in the jungles of Mexico, which lent a very real dimension to the proceedings. Predator remains one of Arnie's most beloved action thrillers of the 80s, and being a huge fanboy of the Austrian oak, it's always a pleasure to look back on the movie with fresh and more mature eyes as the years go by. I caught the film at a time when I was beginning to form a group of friends who would become lifelong companions in my movie-going adventures, even still to this day. So ultimately, I hope this video has given you something to ponder the next time you take a trip to the Central American rainforest to battle an almost invisible alien hunter, hell-bent on removing your spine or hanging your lifeless body from a tree. The Predator is one of cinema's most iconic movie monsters, and rightfully so. It's a shame its legacy hasn't seen the best possible sequels overall, but there's still time for Prey to breathe some more life into what is a world with vast potential. As always, your opinion means the most to us here at JoBlo, so let us know your thoughts on Predator in the comments.
Run! Go! Get to the chopper!
Blows Texas Chainsaw away.
Evil Dead 2.
It's a classic horror film.
Dead by Dawn. Coming soon to a theater near you.
In the great John Cusack vehicle from 2000, High Fidelity, the main characters have a discussion on what the word yet means, and plug in Evil Dead 2 as the source.
Just come on. What would it mean to you, that sentence? I haven't seen Evil Dead 2 yet.
Well, to me it would mean that you're a liar.
It's a bit where John Cusack's character Rob is asking his employee Barry, played by Jack Black, if the yet in the sentence means he was planning on seeing it. He's using the movie as a placeholder for what his ex-girlfriend may or may not do with a new man. But the exchange is great as Barry talks at length about how good the movie is in all aspects.
It's so funny and violent and the soundtrack kicks fucking ass.
And he's not wrong. It's nearly a perfect recommendation, but let's look at how it got there. Evil Dead is the 1981, or 1983, well, both, horror classic that Sam Raimi and his family and friends made based on their shorter film, Within the Woods. It took blood, sweat, and tears to make, and you can watch our other 80s horror memory all about it to learn much more. It made waves and even a decent amount of money, while also gaining a fairly famous and important fan and horror author and legend, Stephen King. This was crucial, as Raimi couldn't come up with the money, and King was able to help out in that department, which would lead to Raimi appearing in the King miniseries adaptations, The Stand and The Shining.
Well, you know, the funny thing about Evil Dead was I couldn't wait to see it. I couldn't wait to see it. You know, I think the big thing, and Sam Raimi always jokes about the fact that they ran into Stephen King on the streets in New York and like asked him to come in and watch the movie and give them a quote. And the quote on the movie poster is the most ferociously original horror movie ever made. That was on the movie poster.
The movie opens with a slightly different version of the first film, which led to some confusion. Is this the same guy? Why does he keep going back to this cabin? Well, the first part of the movie serves as an almost soft remake of its predecessor. Ash takes his girlfriend Linda on a weekend date to an isolated cabin where he finds and listens to the tapes of Professor Noby and inadvertently unleashes an ancient evil. Different things happen from the first film, including there only being 2 people to start with instead of 5. But it feels like Evil Dead, at least mostly. While it is certainly still horrifying, there's also a bit of humor sprinkled in there. That's what makes this movie so accessible. My brother gave me a large chunk of my movie education, particularly in the horror department. And within the realm of horror, he knew exactly how to approach what I could view and when I could take it. With Freddy, it was Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Halloween, it was Part 2, and for the Evil Dead series, he went backward. This was really helpful for me, and he learned from past mistakes, as both Halloween 2 and Nightmare on Elm Street 3 were probably a little too much for me in the scares department. Nightmare in particular is when I remember not being able to sleep for at least a couple of nights. With Raimi and Company's excellent trilogy of films, I saw Army of Darkness first. But then, when I loved it, I was shown the glory of one of the more famous examples of slapstick. That genre may have been used heavily by Peter Jackson in his early output, but it was perfected in 1987 with Evil Dead 2. Its mix of extensive gore, scares, and humor has yet to be matched, and probably never will be. The special effects that mix in everything from stop motion to trickery to good old-fashioned on-screen practical effects never cease to amaze and are a wonder to look at on screen. Bruce Campbell's physical comedy and acting throughout make it an almost live-action cartoon, with the over-the-top violence to match. When he is laughing and swaying with the lamp while the rest of the cabin laughs at him, or when he's fighting his own possessed hand while it's still attached. There are examples throughout the medium that can stack up against that in terms of the commitment and showmanship. Bruce himself has often said that it's his favorite film of the trilogy that they made.
Weirdly enough, with my career, I've found myself working on sequels to movies that inspired me or changed the direction in my career. You know, working on Day of the Dead was the sequel to still my favorite movie. And then having a chance to work on Evil Dead 2. And then subsequently, I worked on a couple Halloween movies. I worked on a couple Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I worked on a couple Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. So weirdly enough, I found myself like the Forrest Gump of special effects makeup, because I ended up not only having a chance to stand on set with filmmakers like Wes Craven and George Romero and John Carpenter, but collaborate with them in a way that I would have never imagined when I was 15 or 16 or 17, seeing their movies and being terrified that I would ever be that kid that would be sitting at a meeting with Wes Craven talking about horror movies.
The idea of the sequel was initially thrown around during the filming of the first movie, where they wanted the concept to be Ash getting sucked through a portal and sent back in time to fight Deadites, along with Knights. It would be called Evil Dead 2, Evil Dead and the Army of Darkness. But that fell through. Raimi would make the movie Crime Wave, which was a massive flop, and ended up losing his financing for the proposed sequel. After conversations with some producers, they were greenlit, but the request was that the movie be much more similar to the first film. Another reason why the first part of Evil Dead 2 is a loose remake of its predecessor. Of course, the concept of Ash going through time would live on, and as this movie ends, the third sequel, Army of Darkness, was set up and eventually came to fruition. While the movie was requested to be similar to the first one, there are definitely differences, particularly in tone. The first Evil Dead is a lot of things, but funny is not one of them. Evil Dead 2 was written by Sam Raimi and Scott Spiegel, and the humor may have been in part due to where they were when writing it. Spiegel himself was influenced heavily by the old Popeye cartoons, the Three Stooges, particularly their slapstick behavior.
I will show you the Stooges.
And the hamburger helper mascot? Yes, he had made a short film about it in his teens called Attack of the Helping Hand that pretty much helped write the scenes with Ash's hand being taken over by the evil in the woods. While the rest of the cast is serviceable in their roles, of admittedly mostly archetypes and caricatures, it's Bruce and Ted Raimi who steal the show. Ash is one of the most beloved horror characters of all time, but do not sleep on Raimi, who puts in an outrageously entertaining turn as the Deadite resurrected Henrietta Nobi, who resides in the basement. This is a step up from his role in the first movie, which was credited as Fake Shemp, showing that Spiegel wasn't the only one influenced by the Three Stooges. A fake Shemp is a term that was used in Three Stooges shorts when, after Shemp Howard died, they would use someone and show them from the back to where you couldn't tell that it wasn't him. There are a lot of actors in this franchise who merely show up as fake Shemps to portray characters that have already died or turned into Deadites. While Henrietta was a much more important role for Ted Raimi, it was also a lot harder than just being a fake Shemp.
So Ted, how does it feel to be stuck in that costume all day?
I guess it's inexplicable. It's beyond your wildest nightmares.
As a much younger fan, I had already been exposed to Ash in a way. I had seen the box art of all three movies with Ash front and center on two of the three, but also from a video game that shamelessly stole from the ever-changing hero. When Ash gets ready to fight the good fight and is in the work shed, we are treated to him saying his famous line of groovy. I had already been playing a computer game called Duke Nukem 3D and thought the character was an awesome, overly macho dude, but later found out he stole most of his lines from tougher, more fun movie characters. Even if it was in jest from the makers of the game, Ash as a character reaches his midpoint of going from everyman to over-the-top comic book character, albeit one with a iffy moral center and fewer heroic bones in his body than most action figures. Of course, in the pre-DVD 90s, it became my mission to collect the Anchor Bay releases on VHS of the Evil Dead trilogy. The first movie was a gift, and the third movie was a birthday present from my already mentioned brother. But when my family took a trip to Big Bear, California, I still had some money left over from family cards in my wallet. There was a store just before heading up the mountain that sold video games, music, and of course, VHS tapes. When I saw they had a horror section, I headed straight there, and to my glee and surprise, they had Evil Dead 2 ready to be given a good home. While I'm sure it was a wonderful experience to see that particular movie in theaters when it came out, Getting to buy it and watch it in a cabin at night was an experience that I will never forget. I've seen the movie in theaters at one of those flashback evenings, but I'll never forget the time I watched my very own VHS copy in a cabin at night. The series is, in fact, a series, even if the plots of all three films have things that ignore parts of the other movies. What makes that charming is that each one is different in its own way and lends itself to everyone enjoying them, but having their own movie that jumps out as their favorite. For me, it's Evil Dead 2, which is still fully a sequel even if it feels more like a remake at times. If you look closely though, Sam and company make sure you know it's a continuation and not a remake.
But fortunately, we had the opportunity in '86 to basically remake Evil Dead with more money, which Evil Dead 2 really is sort of a $3 million, not a, $300,000 version of the same movie.
There are so many great scenes in the film, from Ash going crazy in the cabin after his girlfriend Linda is killed, to becoming a deadite himself, to the comical mischief that ensues when the rest of the human characters get to the cabin. But for my money, it's the scene where he has to take on deadite Linda, both her severed head and her Ray Harryhausen-inspired body. She taunts and berates him, but also switches back to his sweet girlfriend to ask for help. It's got the perfect musical cue and switches back and forth between horror, comedy, and even a little drama. When her body busts into the shed, armed with a chainsaw, we would get a glimpse of the deadites Ash will fight in the next installment. While it's nothing compared to the wall geyser that erupts onto Ash when fighting, or saying farewell as it were to his hand, the scene has everything. That's really what Evil Dead 2 is all about though, right? Even beyond its scenes that have perfect moments, it's kind of the perfect horror movie. It delivers on the gore, some of the scares, action, and you care for the characters enough that it matters what they do and when some of them die. The stakes are high for humanity, and even higher in the immediate moments for our characters. When you think of Ash Williams, Army of Darkness is the final version, but Ash here needed to walk so that a few years later, the character could really run. And I don't just mean run his mouth. Evil Dead 2 is an incredible entry and one of the most important movies of the second half of the decade. When you run into someone who says they haven't seen Evil Dead 2 yet, then properly educate them and make sure they create their own solid memories with this stylish and splattery pillar of the 80s.
Some garlic t-shirt, buddy.
Will you wait till Mom finds out? Has everyone gone crazy here?
The Lost Boys. Rated R. Starts Friday, July 31st.
Here we are at the end of 1987. Earlier that summer, President Reagan headed to West Berlin and stood behind bulletproof glass in front of the large crowd where he demanded that Gorbachev tear down the Berlin Wall. We saw the return of Michael Jackson with Bad and Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet. And for you metalheads out there, we were blessed with Anthrax's thrash masterpiece, Among the Living. It's the year we would get a brand new network channel in decades with Fox, who brought the Bundys into our homes, and the Tracy Ullman Show, where we would get our first glimpse of The Simpsons. I mean, without that network taking risks on their shows, we wouldn't be talking about how Al once scored 4 touchdowns in one game, or I wouldn't have been obsessed with Bart versus the Space Mutants. On a different network, Saturday mornings would get totally awesome as we sat inches from the TV screens with multiple bowls of cereal to watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and DuckTales. And I'm willing to bet you can still sing the themes to both. Yes sir, 1987 was rad. With all the pop culture coming to fruition and shaping who I was as a kid, this was also the year that my obsession with movies was taken to another level. Of course, I would watch them with my parents or older siblings before then, mainly comedies like Back to the Future or Overboard, but those weren't ones I would watch over and over alone. Enter my dad, who brought 2 movies into my life that absolutely changed me. Pee-wee's Big Adventure from 1985, and another one of a completely different genre, and a much different rating.
I've always been a huge fan of vampire films, starting with Bela Lugosi in the classic Universal film, all the way through to Christopher Lee's incarnations as Dracula in the Hammer films. And it had been a while since we'd seen a new twist on vampires until the Lost Boys came along.
If you were a child back in the 80s, chances were your parents or babysitters put on tapes of Sesame Street or something equivalent to family-friendly entertainment to stimulate your mind. That was me with the Lost Boys. My mom was a nurse who worked nights, and my dad was a dude in his late 20s who didn't know any better. I can't blame the guy for not wanting to sit around with his kids and watch those shows. The same goes for my older siblings whenever they had to watch me. They just wanted to bring this little guy into their own world and hope that one day he would be cool, just like them. Instead of wanting me to listen to stuff like Raffi, they'd blast AC/DC, Iron Maiden, and Motley Crue.
Iron Maiden? Excellent!
And indeed, it shaped me into the metal and horror fan that I am today. I had seen horror movies before then, of course, sometimes with dad and my siblings, and sometimes late at night from the hallway when they thought that I was asleep. Most of the time, they were too scary for me to fully finish, but when it came to The Lost Boys, it was just like Goldilocks testing out something from Baby Bear. It was just right. I would have the movie played over and over, to the point where I'm sure everyone was sick of it. I actually do remember my dad coming home from the video store one day with a tape in hand. Everyone was curious about which flick we were going to watch that night, and then everyone sighed in unison when it turned out to be The Lost Boys. Gotta keep the little kid happy, you know?
I talk about these movies a lot when I do interviews that define cool for me. Usually, you know, movies like Heathers, I use Christian Slater a lot, like Heathers or Pump Up the Volume, or these, he was the definition of cool. But Lost Boys, to me, was the definition of cool at that time. When you first met that gang of, you know, led by Kiefer Sutherland, like, there was just something inherently cool. And the way that it was shot, and the idea of this, you know, boardwalk and carnival and the bridge, there's everything about it. It felt like a place that I wanted to live or go to.
So what makes this film so awesome? Why did I want to see it more than any movie that I had ever seen before? Let's start from the beginning. As the camera flies over the Pacific Ocean leading up to an amusement park, heavily reverb drums kick in and echo through the speakers, followed by a choir singing the film's theme song, Cry Little Sister. Right off the bat, we are introduced to the titular characters of the movie, and soon after, a death coming from above, completely setting the tone of the movie for how much it's going to rock. Another thing this film tells us from the very beginning is that it is a Richard Donner production. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to tell you I knew who this man was by the name recognition when I was just 5 years old, but in the years that followed, it would be a name that would be very important to the entertainment that I welcomed into my world. For starters, there was not a person I know who grew up in the 80s and wasn't obsessed with the Goonies. Hell, people still talk about it to this day, hoping for a sequel that will never come to fruition. But that's not all. He gave us the best Superman we've had so far, but also Lethal Weapon, Scrooged, and shit, even the toy is hilarious. The list goes on, but he's also responsible for bringing Tales from the Crypt to the small screen, and even directed one of my favorite episodes about a guy who can resurrect himself after getting implanted with the cells of a cat. To say this man was a legend in filmmaking is quite an understatement. And while Mr. Donner produced this film, we can't ignore the fantastic direction from Joel Schumacher.
Another thing I love about The Lost Boys is the direction by Joel Schumacher. I mean, he was I think he came from music videos, and you know, you can tell from watching that film. It's so 80s, artfully 80s shot, like a music video. And it's dated in that way, but it's kind of great because it really, like some of the other films we've talked about, it does really capture the essence of the 80s, the good and the cheese.
After a couple of his first films were both critical and commercial bombs, including one featuring Mr. T, Schumacher delivered the Brat Pack ensemble classic St. Elmo's Fire. I mean, whether you know that film or not, you can't deny how catchy the theme song to that one is. Heck, I even bet the minute that you hear the name St. Elmo's Fire, your brain automatically goes to the chorus of the song. Come on, don't lie. Even though he has been a little bit of a punching bag for being the reason that Batman has nipples on his suit,
this is why Superman works alone.
You can't deny that he hit an absolute home run with The Lost Boys.
And having played a vampire myself as Baron Athanas on What We Do in the Shadows, looking back at The Lost Boys, it's like, no, see, that's the kind of vampire I could never be. Because they were young and hot and like, you know, a gang of like, yeah, we're the cool kids. Oh, we also bite people.
Another thing this movie hit a home run with was the cast. The chemistry between the actors is exquisite, with each member delivering memorable performances.
And there was a older brother, younger brother storyline going on as well, where again reminding us that family is everything, family's important, and family is a place of protection. But then you bring in these elements of vampires, and like, now what do we have? Right?
Jason Patric's portrayal of Michael is nothing short of mesmerizing. He brings a brooding intensity to the character, creating a complex and compelling protagonist. Michael's journey from a regular teenager to a conflicted vampire is a testament to Patric's acting prowess. His ability to convey the internal struggle, the allure of the vampire lifestyle, and the yearning for connection with Star adds layers to the character, making Michael more than just a victim of circumstance. The late Corey Haim, who plays the younger brother Sam, injects the film with infectious energy and charisma. His character provides a perfect balance to the darker themes, offering comic relief and a relatable teenage charm.
You're a vampire, Michael. My own brother, a goddamn shit-sucking vampire. Oh, you wait till Mom finds out, buddy.
Sam's witty one-liners and genuine reactions to the supernatural chaos unfolding around him make him such an endearing character. Haim's performance not only adds levity to the film, but also highlights the bond between the two brothers, making their relationship a central emotional anchor in the story. And then you have the mother, Lucy, played perfectly by Diane Wiest. Lucy's character is introduced as a recently divorced mother seeking a fresh start in the ominous town of Santa Carla. Wiest brings a mix of vulnerability and strength to the role, embodying a woman determined to provide stability for her two sons, Michael and Sam. You know, we'll just ignore that she's taking them to the death capital of the world. In the face of the paranormal events surrounding her sons, Lucy reacts with a blend of disbelief, concern, and a motherly determination to protect her family. Every time I saw her on screen, I saw my own mother.
My friend from grade school was Diane Wiest's nephew. And I remember like he was like so popular in our school because that was his aunt, I guess, is it niece of his aunt? It was his aunt in that movie. And so I remember when Lost Boys came out, like, he was the cool kid in school.
And Diane Wiest can't do anything wrong, ever. She's the mom that we all wanted to have, I think.
Oh, they're just young. We were that age too once.
And if it's the 80s with one Corey in it, there was an unspoken rule you had to have another. And this is the one that started it all. Corey Feldman's portrayal of Edgar Frog is a blend of earnestness and badassery. His deadpan delivery, along with his unwavering commitment to hunting vampires, brings a unique and memorable dimension to the film. Feldman's chemistry with Jameson Newlander, who plays his brother Alan Frog, is a highlight, creating a dynamic vampire hunting duo that adds an extra layer of entertainment. And the dinner scene where they try to see if Lucy's new boyfriend is the head vampire showcases his comic relief when the film needs it. I became obsessed with License to Drive.
I was a huge Corey Feldman fan, probably like most of us. Other movies, not horror in the 80s, Dream a Little Dream, License to Drive. Now seeing these guys take on the role of vampire hunters, I was just like, this is so cool. Everything about that movie to me was the embodiment of cool.
You can't mention The Lost Boys without mentioning the Coreys. They are great in that film, and it's such a classic horror trope that we've seen. The young horror fan who knows monsters are real, but none of the adults believe them, and those young people are going to face off against the monsters. Well, that's what The Lost Boys has going for it with the Coreys, Corey Feldman and Corey Haim, and we saw that in the Monster Squad and some other great 80s horror films. But I also love that part of The Lost Boys. The Lost Boys, with brilliant makeup effects designed by Greg Cannon. The Lost Boys made vampires cool in a new way that we hadn't seen before, and made them youthful. And they weren't in some castle on a hill. They were just kids. They were, motorcycle kids, led by Kiefer Sutherland. And they were different. And when they turned vampire on you and they were ready to feast, they were scary. And Greg Cannon did some developed a wonderful look for those characters that really focused on the brow, creating this really just evil, bulky brow, and some adjustments here, brilliant vampire fangs, and of course the hair work. One of the things that really stands out about the vampires of the Lost Boys, in addition to their makeups, which we never really saw with vampires, Bela Lugosi wouldn't even wear teeth. It was just him with some lighter makeup. Same with Christopher Lee. He did have teeth, but he was still just a human. The Lost Boys, their look changed. They transformed a little bit, and they were scarier.
And then you have the Lost Boys themselves, the vampires of Santa Carla, led by Kiefer Sutherland's David. Kiefer's portrayal of David is a masterclass in villainy. From the moment he appears on screen, there's an undeniable magnetism to his character. David isn't just a one-dimensional baddie. He's a complex and intriguing figure who draws you in with a potent blend of charm and menace. Whether he's inviting Michael into the vampire gang or leading his fellow undead with a magnetic presence, there's an allure that makes it easy to understand why Michael is drawn to him. Sutherland's portrayal makes David someone you almost want to root for, despite knowing the dangers that he represents. It's this duality that sets David apart and makes him a memorable antagonist.
And the amazing villain of Kiefer Sutherland as David, the villain, is fantastic. He's with his white hair and the long coat and his all that sort of 80s giggly gauze, and he looks like he could be singing for a flock of seagulls. But
the vampires themselves look like straight up rock stars, whether they are blazing through the town on motorcycles, dangling from train tracks, or even just eating Chinese food. They ooze with high levels of being badass. And when they transform in front of Michael for the first time, their monstrous form is metal as hell as they rip apart a group of partiers jamming to the Run DMC and Aerosmith collaboration. Speaking of music, one thing 80s movies were known for was how great the soundtracks were. Some would say that Kenny Loggins made the best soundtracks, but I'd argue this film in particular has the greatest soundtrack of them all. One of the standout tracks that has become inseparable from the film is Cry Little Sister by Gerard McMahon. The haunting and melodic tones of this song perfectly encapsulate the dark and mysterious atmosphere of the movie. It's such an iconic song that has been covered so many times from bands like Marilyn Manson to a more somber rendition from Churches for the movie Nightbooks, which also has a kid in the movie obsessed with the Lost Boys. Even Corey Feldman covers it when he tours with his band. The less said about that, probably the better.
from an amazing title track song that everyone knows. When you hear that song, you think Lost Boys.
You also have Echo and the Bunnymen covering People Are Strange, INXS, and the song Lost in the Shadows. If that song doesn't pump you up when they're riding their bikes to Hudson's Bluff, I don't know what will. Finally, it's damn near impossible to talk about the music in this film without mentioning the Sexy Sax Man. I Still Believe by Tim Capello is such a banger, and when he appears on screen completely owning that saxophone, it's really hard not to chuckle and rock out at the same time.
I mean, Sax Man, the muscular sax man from that film. That's one of my favorite memes. Muscular sax man.
It was the first soundtrack I fell in love with and still love to this day.
There's a movie that I'm attached to now, and I'm really pushing my Lost Boys influences on it about, I think there's a lot of relatable things that happen in Lost Boys. Moving to a new town, not having friends, falling into the wrong crowd, trying to be cool, wanting to be liked, this relationship with the girl on the wrong side of the track, everything about it, I think, still resonates with people. It explored, these really interesting themes. Mother now dating this strange guy, and surely he's a vampire and whatever. So there were so many really interesting themes it was exploring. So Lost Boys is one of my favorites.
The Lost Boys is 80s as hell, yet still feels timeless.
It's very 80s. That is like it has that total overproduced slickness to it.
And the hair, of course, that flowing 80s hair. Come on, that was so 80s.
The visual aesthetics are nothing short of spectacular. Cinematographer Michael Chapman deserves credit too, but it's Schumacher's vision that brings it all together. The way he captures the eerie beauty of Santa Carla and the nocturnal world of the vampires is masterful. The film's atmosphere, from the sun-soaked beaches to the dark, shadowy layers of the vampires, creates a captivating backdrop for the unfolding narrative. There are multiple scenes that are so iconic.
The scene that always sticks with me is the noodles and the maggots.
I can't even eat rice from a Chinese restaurant without thinking about David tricking him into thinking he was eating maggots. I mean, come on. The scene was also hysterically recreated in What We Do in the Shadows.
There's worms wiggling around in my plate.
Good old Paschetti. The part where Sam is freaked out over his older brother flying outside the house.
So where are you? The flying nun?
Hilarious. I even remember recreating the movie's final showdown in my living room while in my PJs. The 80s had some great vampire movies like Fright Night, Life Force, and the underrated and still hard to find Near Dark, which also came out the same year as this one. Hell, even Once Bitten is a fun little gem, but none of these were as important to me as The Lost Boys. With very minimal swearing and a very tame and tasteful love scene, it's a perfect gateway movie for youngsters wanting to dip their toes into the horror side of vampires. Now that I'm older, with a little version of myself running around, I stepped into my dad's shoes and introduced my little guy to this film. It was his first vampire movie, and he absolutely loved it. You could say I skipped a small hill and took him straight to Everest in terms of vampire movies. Often when I show him some of my favorite 80s movies, he doesn't hesitate to tell me how dated they look. But not The Lost Boys. That is just a straight up banger.
Lost Boys is one of those movies that I'm excited about showing my son because I think it holds up. So many of these movies don't hold up. You watch them now and they're just over the top and they're bad and they're poorly acted and they're poorly shot. But Lost Boys is one of those movies that even today, it's such a fucking well-made, well-done, well-acted movie.
What are your thoughts on this film? Do you share the same fond memories of this perfect film as I do? Let us know in the comments and we will see you in the next one.
Death by stereo.